Thank you all for joining us today for Jennifer Coco's oral. I'm Stacy Jackson, and Jenny has been my senior assistant in Algebra 2 this year. Joining me on the panel are Mr. Johnson and Mr. Nelson. We do have a couple of new things this year. The audience will be able to provide comments to Jenny as she goes through her oral process. So if you have something encouraging to say, feel free to send her a comment. And you will also be allowed to submit questions for us to ask Jenny as we do our panel discussion. I'm going to pray for us, and then we'll let Jenny get going. Father, thank you so much for Jenny and all the work she's put into this oral. Thank you for her compassion and her passion for this topic. I pray that you will give her peace and clarity as she shares with us and help us to hear what you would have us to hear. In Christ's name, amen.
Or taking your dog on a walk. You look over and witness a car accident. Running over to help the people involved, a man gets out of his car, acting rude and obnoxious, just concerned about the date he is going to be late for if he does not hurry up. While a woman and her 2-month-old baby are badly injured due to this man's reckless behavior. In the ambulance, the baby is in bad shape. She is crying uncontrollably. The man then shouted, "Can you shut that kid up?" The staff seemed disturbed since he was the one that had caused this pain for the baby. It seemed as though he had no empathy. The woman and baby ended up dying due to this man's carelessness. From the very beginning, this story gives the example of a person's disregard for others, especially their well-being. In addition, regardless of mental or physical orientation, the question that arises is whether or not psychopaths have a conscience. First, let us start off by defining our terms. When people typically think of a psychopath, they think of a man or woman that goes on a killing rampage. Through the various research and interviews, my discovery led to the contrast between the scientific definition of a psychopath and the believer's definition of a psychopath. Psychologists today define a psychopath as one without a conscience, absolutely apathetic, and consumed with an antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder, also known as ASPD, is a personality disorder characterized by a long-term pattern of disregard for or violation of the rights of others. An individual living with ASPD often has a low moral sense, a history of crime, legal problems, or impulsive and aggressive behavior. Although psychopaths have ASPD, not all people who have this disorder are psychopaths. Unfortunately, this is the scientific definition, which the believer's definition has one slight difference, according to my research. One of the main reasons scientists believe that psychopaths do not have a conscience is due to their lack of empathy towards others. Many statistics and stories that I have read say that many CEOs or people in high power tend to be psychopaths that are functional within society. This is because they have to make decisions based off of what is best for the company and not how it will affect the lives of the people working for them. Interviewing the psychologist, Dr. Mehdi, he states, CEOs, they will lay off 40,000 people, and it doesn't bother them. Lots and lots of CEOs are psychopaths because it does not bother them to crawl over other people to get to the top. And sometimes you need people with this kind of mindset because maybe the company will fall apart if you don't. There are many stories similar to this that show the lack of empathy psychopaths have for others. Another example is Adolf Hitler. We are not certain that he was a psychopath, but looking at all of the evidence, we can assume that he was a psychopath. Learning about Hitler and American history, I could tell that there was something majorly wrong with this man, as could anyone who studies him. Hitler's lack of empathy towards the Jews is a big indicator of his psychopathic like-mindedness. 1 Timothy 4:1-2 says, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times, some will abandon the faith, following deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. This first shows that everyone has a conscience. It can just be tainted by the devil and used for evil. Sophomore year in Rhetoric 1, we read a book called Mere Christianity, which, as you can guess, discusses Christianity and our beliefs. Lewis states, "The idea of the law of nature is just as all bodies are governed by the law of gravitation and organisms by biological law, so the creature called man also had his law. With this great difference that a body could not choose whether to obey the law of gravitation, but a man could choose either to obey the law of human nature or to disobey it." The book is telling us that everyone has a sense of the law of nature, your conscience, just some follow it while others choose to ignore it. Now we can answer the lingering question, do psychopaths have a conscience or not? By reading books, interviewing professionals, and sifting through articles, the answer became more clear. As defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, a conscience is the part of you that judges how moral your actions are and makes you feel guilty about bad things that you have done or things you feel responsible for doing. Science says that everyone has a conscience, except psychopaths. However, this does not exactly line up with what the Bible has to say. In Romans 2:13 through 15, Paul communicates, "For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the laws are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts accusing them, and at other times even defending them." It is clearly visible here in Scripture that Christians and non-believers alike, those yet to receive Christ, are given a conscience. Christianity believes in the existence of a conscience regardless of medical diagnosis. I am convinced that God has given to each person the gift of a conscience regardless of medical or personality disorder. As the famous author C.S. Lewis states in his book, Mere Christianity, "It seems we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. People may be sometimes mistaken about them, but they are not a matter of mere taste and opinion any more than the multiplication table." He established the idea that within each individual, there is a moral understanding of the natural human law. There are many studies explaining the different causes that lead to the development of a psychopath. For my oral, I interviewed Mr. Mark McQueen, who is a mental health specialist. Through his practice and counseling, inevitably, he has encountered psychopaths. Knowing how they operate, I felt it appropriate to draw from his experiences. After talking to Mr. McQueen, it became apparent that the mental development of a psychopath is typically caused by their environment. For example, there are genetic differences in their brain that put them in this position. However, with a psychopath, what you need is this kind of genetic difference plus environment. In other words, if you have someone who is genetically predisposed to being a psychopath, but you put them in a good environment, they will most likely not grow up to be a psychopath. But most psychopaths grow up in environments where their parents are abusive, they're on drugs, or they're never around. One of the main reasons psychopaths act this way is because something has occurred in their past that scarred them, and they feel the need to take revenge and make others feel the hurt that they have felt. Undoubtedly, because of this deep pain and which they have experienced, justification is the inevitable cause for the hurting of others. In talking through the different situations Mr. McQueen has dealt with, the most prevalent seem to be kids who were abused at a young age. He says, "I've worked with people who have abused kids. Some don't seem to get it. They feel justified in what they did. Others know it was wrong, but they just couldn't help themselves in the heat of the moment." Interestingly enough, the preliminary findings from a pilot project done by Joanne Integrator reveals that psychopaths may not be using the same areas of the brain as normal individuals when processing emotional words. During her collaborative research at the Mount Sinai and Bronx Medical Center in New York, her team developed brain images for psychopathic and normal individuals while they performed different tasks. It has been through this brain imaging technology that scientists have been able to gain exciting new insight into the emotional life of psychopaths. Integrator's research categorized the distinctions between their brain and emotional material from that of a normally functioning individual. I read a book by Robert D. Hare called Without Conscience. Dr. Hare is a professor at the University of Columbia and has been studying psychopaths for over 20 years. In his book, he discusses how psychopaths come about, why they are the way that they are, and how we can try to help them. Notable to his research, there is a differentiation between white-collar psychopaths who are functional within society and those that are not functional within society. In fact, the white-collar psychopaths are able to properly function within society and be successful due to their lack of empathy towards others. They're also quick thinkers and word manipulators, which provides them with the ability to lie without regard. Hare states that given their personality, it comes as no surprise that psychopaths make good imposters. They have no hesitation in forging impressive credentials to adopt chameleon-like professional roles that give prestige and power. Going even further, they are more likely to choose a profession where the skills required are easily fabricated and learned quickly. Hare supportively suggests that psychopaths find it easy to pose as financial consultants, ministers, counselors, and psychologists. Even though they try to pull off other roles, their choices are short-lived due to the danger presented. To further explain the threat of a functional white-collar psychopath, Hare recounts a story of a previous encounter. 10 years ago in Vancouver, there was a man that posed as an orthopedic surgeon. For almost a year, he performed operations, most small, but a few difficult, lived a lavish, high-profile lifestyle, and was active in social and charitable functions. When questions began to be asked about his sexual relations with his patients, his medical procedures, and several botched operations, he simply disappeared, leaving behind an embarrassed medical community and number of physically and emotionally damaged patients. A few years later, he was found in England, where he was arrested and jailed for posing as a psychiatrist. At his trial, it was learned at various times that he had also posed as a social worker, a police officer, an undercover customs agent, and a psychologist specializing in marital problems. Asked how he managed to slip into so many roles, he replied, "I read a lot." In contrast, an extremely common example of a psychopath that is not functional within society is Ted Bundy. For those of you who don't know who he is one of the most famous serial killers in US history. Reports explain that he murdered over 30 women. Bundy had a very troubled childhood and was bullied in elementary school. But as he continued on into college, he was loved by many of the students. Because he was unable to emotionally connect with women, rage and anger welled up inside of him, which in turn led to the mass murders. He was even quoted on trial saying, "I don't feel guilt for anything. I feel sorry for people who feel guilty." Thus, as seen above, there are those psychopaths who are functional within society and those that are not. One question you may be asking yourself is, what can we as believers do to help those families that kids are displaying psychopathic tendencies? Similarly, this was a question that I did not know the answer to before this journey began, but found intriguing to research. Mr. McQueen commented on the subject. Where you start is you teach empathy, the daily training from mom and dad that someone's choices might be impacting someone else, that someone might emotionally respond different to a set of circumstances than the kid. From a story of a diagnosed psychopathic woman at the age of 35, she had a lengthy record of criminal behavior and violence. She decided to turn her life around and seek freedom. Following her release from prison at the age of 42, she entered into a university to study in that exact field, counseling psychology. She later worked with street kids and was not charged with an offense over the past 5 years. Not all victims with psychopathic tendencies are without reach. We can help them when they decide they want to improve their lives. In dealing with a psychopath, choice must be preserved. In counseling and trying to help them, there must be a sensitivity to the person's desire for help. In conclusion, as Christians, we are called to believe in truth. Truth that is without variation. Truth that is rooted in, revolved around, and foundational to the Bible. Because God calls his believers to cling to his word as truth, I believe the evidence is clear. Psychopaths have a conscience. Regardless of the argument between scientists and others who tend to side with the fact that psychopaths do not have a conscience, God urges believers to renounce the hidden things of dishonesty, not to walk in craftiness, nor handle the word of God deceitfully. Therefore, the evidence supports that fact. As Christians, we cannot simply agree with and apply that which we pick and choose from the Bible. We must accept the Bible entirely. With all the evidence clearly given, psychopaths do have a conscience.
Okay, Jenni, great job. You feel better now?
Oh, I think can you hear me now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good deal. Great job.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your plans are for the coming year real quick?
Yes, I plan to attend Tarleton University and study business management.
Are you going to play volleyball?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to start with talking about the conscience some more. So tell me a little bit about what it might look like to have no conscience versus having maybe a little bit of a conscience.
Well, personally, I don't think that anyone doesn't have a conscience, so I don't exactly know what that would look like. Like, I don't know if they would even be alive, honestly, but I think like one of the ways that scientists, whenever I did my study on the scientist part of it, scientists, they define a psychopath as having absolutely no conscience and a sociopath is having a mild conscience. But
Okay.
I don't agree with that.
Okay. So tell me this then. Is there a difference between having a little conscience, or as scientists might say, no conscience, and having too much of a conscience?
I would say that there are people that would be more in tune with their conscience than other people. So I guess, yes. Like people that are in the word daily, I would say they are more in tune with their conscience than people that are non-believers or non-Christians or anything else.
Do you think we can have too much of a conscience to the point that it causes a psychological issue of some sort?
I don't exactly know. I think that could be possible, yes, to like I would see that as someone second guessing themselves all the time. So like, is this right? Wait, maybe that's more right. No, that's better. So it's like you can have to an extent you can.
Okay, do you think that things like anxiety or fear of man might fall into that category?
As having too much of a conscience,
Uh-huh.
anxiety. I don't think so. I think anxiety is different than your conscience.
Okay. So going back to the scientist thing, you clearly disagree with the scientists, and I support you in that 100%. But science supposedly is there to study the truth and to show us what truth is. So can you reconcile that for me? Like, why can scientists be so far off on this?
I think a lot of scientists and just science in general, their vision is clouded mostly because a lot of them are like, don't believe in Christianity. And so I think if they don't take that into account, which is the truth, and they don't believe that, then I think that is how their judgment is clouded to where they come to the conclusion that psychopaths don't have a conscience.
So we're relying heavily on scientists right now with all that's going on with COVID, right? So how do we know if we can trust them or not?
Scientists?
Yes.
I think in certain aspects, scientists, like with medical stuff, I think it's really hard because there are a lot of things that have been found that scientists, they like fake a lot of experiments to like say one thing, but I think if you have to do your own research. You can't rely on other people mostly. So like if you rely on them for this, then you need to go double check it yourself and look up and research things for yourself to find out the truth for yourself. You can't always rely on others to find the truth for you.
Okay. And I would add to that this is part of why us as tutors do what we do at MCA. It's important for us to have scientists and business people and psychiatrists and psychologists out there who have integrity and aren't going to be prideful and fake it, basically. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic to Mr. Johnson for now.
All right, Jenny, that was really well done. I want to focus on this idea of functioning psychopaths, mainly because I want to try to figure out who's a functioning psychopath on staff at MCA. So, what are the different motivators for a functioning psychopath? What drives kind of why they do what they do?
I think success is one of the big things. Like I said, CEOs or people in high power, they can crawl over other people with not feeling bad about anything that they have done. And so they can feel very successful because they don't feel the empathy for those other people that they've hurt or thrown under the bus or all of that type of stuff.
Okay. So how might some of their motivations, though, be similar to those who don't have psychopathic tendencies?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
How might the motivations of a functioning psychopath be similar to those who don't categorize as a psychopath? So a normal person.
Okay, I think a normal person probably once they do those things like hurt other people or throw them under the bus, they would feel bad for it and maybe apologize or maybe be like, oh, I messed up. I'm sorry. I need to fix this. But psychopaths don't act like that.
Okay. All right. What triggers a functioning psychopath to become a non-functioning psychopath?
Like one that's not functional within society?
Yeah, what changes, like for someone to go from a functioning psychopath to non-functioning, what changes for them for that change to occur?
I think most psychopaths tend to be very they like plan very well and organized. So I think that it's probably some type of genetic something that happens in their brain that some of them, or they do it once and then it's like, oh, that felt good. Maybe I should do it more. But I don't exactly know what you're asking, but yeah.
So what makes a non-functioning psychopath non-functional? Like, is it purely their environment, or is it mental? What is it exactly?
Both. I think like some psychopaths that are functional within society will grow up grow up in bad environments, but they probably get out of it end up being successful. But those that are not functional probably stay in that bad place, like in the gangs and involved in drugs and all those bad things.
Okay. Do you think psychopaths ever recognize kind of their mental or emotional states?
No, I don't think so, because they're so self-centered that they like have blinders on everything else, that they're just focused on themselves and they think they're the greatest person and they think they do everything right. So no, I don't think they recognize it.
So can they properly process emotions like love or stressors such as grief and excitement?
Typically, no. That would be more sociopaths, but psychopaths typically don't feel any emotion, and when they think they do, it's normally them taking advantage of someone else. Like, I read a story in Dr. Hare's book about this guy who was dating this girl. He was a psychopath. He basically asked her for money. She thought she was in love, but he just took her money and like ran away with like $20,000. Never came back. So it's just like they think that they are, but they don't actually know what feeling emotions is like.
Okay. In your interview with Dr. Mehdi, he seemed to focus a lot on white collar psychopaths and CEOs especially. Do you think it's pretty standard, it's normal for a CEO to be a psychopath, or do you think most of them are normal people?
I don't know the percentage of how many CEOs are, so I couldn't tell you. But a lot of the people in higher power and jobs that I know, I wouldn't think that they were psychopaths. I mean, they seem like very nice people that have empathy and can feel emotion.
That's the right answer there. Yeah. So what's the difference? How can you tell the difference between, someone in power who is a psychopath and someone who just has to routinely make tough decisions in their job?
I think some of it is, especially with the pandemic right now going on, a lot of CEOs are giving away a lot of money, or they're making a lot of jobs. So I think a lot of it is what they do with those decisions, or the motives for those decisions. So if they're like, oh, I'm just going to fire these people so that I can make more money in the end. Or like, I have to fire them because I won't survive without it.
Okay. Awesome. All right. I want to pass the mic to Mr. Nelson.
All right. Well done, Jenny.
Thank you.
So I kind of want to piggyback a little bit off of Mr. Johnson's line of questioning there at the end. So I'm reminded of a quote by Stalin that's discussed in World History 2. And Stalin says that one death is a tragedy and a million is just a statistic, right? Mm-hmm. So, thinking about your example of CEOs, and they can lay off a bunch of people, and it seems like they show no remorse in doing that. Do you think that the sheer magnitude of the people that they're laying off, or that they're negatively impacting, do you think that the fact that it's not a personal thing that's going on, they're not actually looking the people in the eye, does that make it easier for them to make that decision?
I think so. I think when they don't see the ramifications of them firing all those people, they don't see how it affects those people's families or the people around them. I think it's an easier decision. Yes.
Okay, so since they don't see the ramifications of it, does that necessarily mean that they're a psychopath then, or is it that they're just oblivious to the unintended consequences of their decision?
I think it depends, obviously, on who the person is. But some people, it just depends.
Yeah.
Some would feel bad. Like, some CEOs do feel bad, and they do have emotion. But that, he just gave CEOs as an example. Like, there are a lot of other people that are psychopaths that are functional within society. And it's not all CEOs or people in high power. It's just they typically see that because they don't have empathy towards the people that they're hurting.
Okay. So kind of the key thing there then is empathy, right? Is that kind of the key distinction?
One of them, yes.
Okay. So what about say a military officer? So obviously war is terrible, right? So what about a military officer who has to quickly make decisions knowing that their decisions are ultimately going to result in the death of people under their command?
I think it depends I think it's the motives for it. So like if they're just going out like, oh, these are a bunch of civilians, let's just kill them all. Like, yes, that's a psychopath right there. But like if it's someone, if they're doing it to protect the civil, or like if they're doing it to protect the people of their country, like yes, that makes sense why they would kill those people to save their family and friends and all of those other people.
Okay. All right. That's good. I kind of want to switch gears a little bit now, and you referenced the Apostle Paul a few times in your thesis, and looking at Acts 22, Paul's he discusses his role in persecuting and even killing Christians before he comes to Christ, and he even goes as far as to say he was zealously doing that, and so it seems evident that he felt justified in doing, in persecuting and killing Christians at the time before he was converted. So would it be appropriate to say that Paul was a psychopath?
That's actually interesting because I got a question that was like, I wonder if anyone's going to ask if anyone in the Bible was a psychopath. And Paul was one of the people that I thought of. And so I think he could have been before everything happened, but God came to him and he changed him. So I think one of the only ways that psychopaths can be changed is through God, his intervention. And like I said earlier, like they put in the effort to change themselves and do that. So yes.
Okay. So yeah, I think I definitely agree with you. It seems like Paul would have exhibited psychopathic tendencies prior to his conversion to Christianity. So do you think after he came to Christ and he came to know Christ, do you think that he ceased being a psychopath, or do you think that part of that would have remained with him for the rest of his life?
I think him being a psychopath will remain with him.
Yeah, just some of the struggles with being a psychopath, would those things still stay with him even after his conversion?
I think they can, but I don't think so. I think they could have, but I don't think so at the same time. I think because God came to him and he showed him what Christianity is and showed him what God is, what he is, that he took all of that from him. So I don't think he probably had to struggle with any of that after.
Okay. Do we all have the propensity to be a psychopath?
Ooh, yes.
Okay, so
I am.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I would agree. It seems to be that, being a psychopath is a part of it's in nature, right? And you even describe it as someone who has a seared conscience.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what does it look like for somebody to develop a seared conscience?
I think it's letting the enemy come in. Like after I said that quote, your conscience can be tainted by the devil. So I think that's the devil coming in and you allowing him to come in and taint your conscience.
Okay, so how does somebody go about reawakening their conscience once it's become seared?
First, making the conscious decision that you want to be a better person and improve your conscience, because you can't get help if you don't want help. And also turning to God, I think, is the other one, asking God to relieve you of your sins and helping you with your problems.
Okay, Awesome. Well, thank you, Jenny. I'm going to pass it on down to Mrs. Jackson again.
All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience now. First question, if psychopaths lack empathy, then do they have the ability to appreciate anything outside of themselves, like family or loved ones?
I think they do mostly, but like Ted Bundy. He took advantage of a bunch of women, didn't feel any guilty, but I actually read he did have a wife, and they married when he was in prison. So I think he thinks it's love. Like, he thinks he loves her, but I don't think that it's actually love that he can feel.
Okay, is it possible to develop psychopathic tendencies without being born with the trait?
Yes, I think so. I think, like I said, environment, it's not just the genetic difference and environment. It can be caused by the environment, plus like being abused or getting into drugs or other things of that nature, like I talked to Mr. McQueen about.
Okay, and I think we have one more. Why did you choose this topic?
Well, I actually didn't choose it until I walked into Miss Jackson's office the first day. I had one option, and I was going to do it. And then we talked it out, and we figured it'd be too emotional. And so we just started talking about other things I was interested in, what I like to read, do. And then I told her that I liked watching Investigation Discovery. And then it just kind of spiraled into Psychopaths, and that's where I landed, so.
Okay, thank you, audience, for your questions, and feel free to keep the comments coming. All right, Jenny, I feel like this is a good follow-up question to that last one. So some of the things you mentioned in your paper and in questions that indicate that someone might be a psychopath are being a psychologist, reading a lot, planning well, organizing, and we've talked about drinking black coffee. That concerns me greatly because I fall into all of those categories. Can you put my... What?
You took the test.
I know. So put my mind at ease. What's the difference? Are you saying I'm not a psychopath?
Yes, you were only a 3.
Oh, okay. Only a 3. Awesome. So I want to go back to the paragraph you had about psychopaths having a different image and brain imaging when they study their brains. So if they've got a literal physical difference in how their body functions, is it fair for us as a society to hold them accountable for their behavior?
Yes, I think so, because they, like I said, they have a sense of their conscience. They know that their conscience is there, so they know what they're doing is wrong. Also, another thing is, like, if they do these bad things, why don't they just come out and tell us, like, oh, guess what I did today? Like, I murdered this person, I robbed this person. Like, they don't do that. They know these things are wrong. And also, it's a danger to the society. If we just allow them to go around and murder people or steal things, then how is it fair to us? So, yes, I think they should be held accountable.
Okay, so do you think that they should automatically go to prison and be separated from society? Or is there some way we can rehab them so that they can become a part of society and function well? So I guess another way of saying that is, can they go from a non-functional psychopath to a functional psychopath through some process we help them through?
I haven't figured that out yet, but the only ways that I've read about or seen is people changing their perspective and them wanting to be better or wanting to be functional members of society. So I think when they decide that they want to, and also, like I said, with young children, if they display psychopathic tendencies, we can help them. But normally once they get to an age like older, it's hard to like reverse it unless they want to.
Okay. Taking a step back from that then, do you think there's any similarity in how psychopaths rationalize their behavior and how we as believers rationalize our behavior when we're sinning?
Yes. I think whenever they rationalize it, it's like, oh yeah, I'm justified in what I did. And then whenever we're sinning, like to our parents, it's like, oh, it was a little white lie. I did it to protect someone or something else. So it's like, yeah, that is very similar.
Okay. I'm going to go down a total different avenue now. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned through your senior project this year?
I actually didn't know anything about this subject when I started, besides what I'd seen on Investigation Discovery. But I learned a lot of things about psychopaths that were very interesting. And everyone's like, oh, that's a cool topic. So that's cool. I get a lot of comments about how cool my topic is. But yes, I learned a lot of things about psychopaths and your conscience. I know what a conscience is, but digging deeper into that and digging deeper into what a white collar psychopath is. I didn't know what that was and all of those types of things. Yes.
So if you were talking to one of the juniors about to be seniors, what are some tips you would give them to get the most they can get out of their senior project next year?
I would say write about something you're passionate about. If you're not passionate about what you're talking about, then you're not going to want to know what you're talking about. You're not going to be intrigued in researching it. So I'd say just be passionate about it. Find something that you are passionate about or your family is passionate about and do it about that.
Okay, great job. I'm going to pass the mic to Mr. Johnson.
All right. First, I just want to thank the audience for stealing a couple of my questions. That was very kind of you. So I want to go back. I'm still fascinated by the functioning, non-functioning psychopaths. And you give Ted Bundy as an example of a non-functioning psychopath. Are all non-functioning psychopaths serial killers?
I would say they're at least violent or something that goes against the law, basically. So anything violent, stealing, drugs, alcohol, anything like that, I would say that they were a non-functional psychopath compared to a functional psychopath.
Okay, so would you say that's just how they show themselves is something unlawful? They tend to do something unlawful?
What? Sorry.
Non-functioning psychopaths, would you say that's how they tend to show themselves, is because they do something unlawful or immoral?
Kind of, but more on the violent side.
Okay.
Yeah, just more on the violent side.
Okay. You touched on this a little bit with Mr. Nelson talking about Paul, but is it possible for someone who's truly a Christian to be a psychopath?
I think so.
Okay.
Sorry, what?
Why so?
Okay. I think, like I said with Paul, like God came to him and he gave himself to God. Like he gave his life to God after everything that had happened with being a psychopath or I don't know if he was, but potentially being a psychopath. God, he just renewed him as a person. Like Paul was a new person after God had come to him. So it's like the old Paul was gone in a sense, and like there was a new Paul. And yes, I think that you can be a Christian.
So, how does our calling as Christians conflict with what seems to be the mental processing of psychopaths?
The belief of Christianity conflict
With how psychopaths view things?
I don't exactly know.
So, what does God call us to do as believers?
Go out and preach his word to others.
Okay, and what are the two greatest commandments?
Love God and love others.
Well, how does that conflict with sort of the mentality of psychopaths?
I get it now. Well, psychopaths, they can't truly love God and they can't truly love others if you are a psychopath, because they can't feel like all the things that God says that we are supposed to be. Like, we're supposed to be kind and loving and treat others with respect and all this kind of stuff. They just don't line up. Like, if you're a psychopath, you're not empathetic towards others. You're not loving towards others. And so God calls us to be those things. And as a psychopath, you can't be those things because of the definition of a psychopath.
Okay, and one last question, which again got hit on, but I'm fascinated by it. Other than Paul, I guess, are there any other psychopaths that kind of stand out in Scripture that you think might be psychopaths?
The one person that comes to my mind is maybe Herod, who killed all the 2-year-old babies whenever Jesus was born because of his motives for doing it. Like, the reason was doing it so that he could stay in power, he could be the king. We know that he was quick to anger, and he murdered a bunch of innocent 2-year-old kids. So that's what I would say.
Sounds like a psychopath. Before I pass this on to Mr. Nelson, Jenni, I just want to say congratulations on getting to this point. You and I don't think spoke a word to each other before this year. And so getting to know you this year has been an absolute blessing, and to see it culminate with this thesis has been awesome. So good job.
Thank you.
All right, Jenni, last series of questions. So I guess the first of my last questions would be, does a society's accepted social norms influence what that society perceives to be psychopathic qualities?
Like, our society today basically doesn't promote psychopaths.
Well, so obviously you have different cultures, right?
Yeah.
And so within those cultures, there's different accepted norms,
Yes.
right? So do those different cultural norms cause what may be or does it cause I'm trying to think of how to word this now. The different cultural norms cause what a psychopath looks like to be different in different societies.
Okay. I don't really think so. I think the definition of a psychopath is pretty straightforward. I think that like what you said about different societies influencing all that stuff, I think the way that societies act and are, psychopaths can come to them or being a psychopath in different ways by being influenced by that society. But I think a psychopath is a psychopath. Like, it's a certain group.
Okay. Do you think that our culture, our society's concept of moral subjectivity, so just do what makes you feel good, do you think that lends itself towards the propagation of psychopaths?
Not by itself. I would say that is probably an aspect to helping psychopaths become psychopaths, but self-centeredness is not the only part of a psychopath. There are a lot of different aspects that a psychopath is, and it's not just self-centeredness. So I'd say it takes more than that, but I would say it could, yes. Like, it could be a part.
Okay. All right. Well, for my closing question, I've taught a lot of great books classes here at MCA. Those are probably my favorite classes to be a part of. So I would like you to tell me about a person that you read about in one of your great books classes and what sort of psychopathic qualities that person may have exhibited.
I would have to say Achilles from the Iliad. I would say that what we knew about him was he is super quick to anger. And like one of the big things that I remember from that book is that he had killed Hector, and then he like tied his body to the back of his chariot and like rode it through the town. So I would say that that is a very psychopathic thing to do. And so that's like the first person I thought of whenever you said that. So yes.
Okay, yeah. I think Achilles is a great example of what a psychopath would look like. So awesome, Jenni. Well, I just want to say congratulations once again, like Mr. Johnson said, for making it this far. You did really awesome. So at this point, I want to turn it over to you, and you get to ask the three of us the questions of your choosing.
Awesome. Okay, I have one question for the all of you, which is, if you had to name one person in your life who you would think is a psychopath, who would it be? The truth comes out.
Mrs. Jackson, you're the lead tutor on this, so.
Okay, I'm going to go first and hope my husband doesn't hear me from the other room. I'm going to say my husband solely because he's a cat person and I'm a dog person.
What? Wow. Johnson?
Okay. There's two names that came to mind. One of them is my father, and but because you guys don't know him, it's not quite as fun a story there. The other, some of you may know, I share a house with Mr. Adams, and I'm just letting you know, after reading your paper, I'm pretty certain he has some psychopathic tendencies. Sure, he can show some empathy at times, but I'm just saying he's a dangerous man to walk out. Pastors can be psychopaths, all right?
Well, you know, I too was actually gonna say Mr. Adams before Mr. Johnson stole it from me. I mean, Mr. Adams, you know, he does lack some of those empathetic qualities at times. And, you know, you're trying to have that conversation with him, and he's over there texting on his cell phone and doesn't even respond back to you. So, yeah.
You have to pick someone else, though. Pick someone from the senior grade. If you had to pick one person from the senior grade that you thought was a psychopath.
All right. Pick someone from the senior grade. All right, I'm gonna have to go with Leah. Because I've had to guard Leah in basketball for the past like 4 years, and she's quite terrifying. So, you know, she's very skilled, and you know, she scares you. She scares me. So definitely want to be Leah.
That's so. Oh my gosh, that was funny.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of this oral then, Jenni. And I just want to thank you for all the hard work and time that you put into this oral. And I want to thank you for your dedication here at MCA and your commitment to this school and all the energy that you've put in. And I think you've really made an impact that's been felt here at MCA. So I will pass it off to Mrs. Jackson, and she can close us in prayer.
Jenni, I just want to thank you for all your help in Algebra 2 this year. I know that you put in countless hours grading revisions, answering questions, bringing sugar to get them nice and sugared up for class, and I appreciate all of that. But most of all, I've enjoyed our time to get to just hang out in my office and visit and talk and get to know you. You are a lovely young woman, and I'm really proud of you. And I'm excited to see what happens next. So let me pray for you. Lord, thank you so much for Jenni, and thank you for selfishly the time that I've gotten to spend with her this year, just getting to know her heart and the level of compassion she has for others. I pray that you will bless her as she goes into her freshman year of college next year. Help her through the next 3 weeks of senior year and let that be successful for her. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Good job, Jenni.
Yeah.